According to an old legend, pagan Rome was founded by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, who during their infancy had been nourished by a she-wolf of the forest. But history has it that Christian Rome was founded by two spiritual brothers, Peter and Paul, whose nourishment was the otherworldly food of the Lamb of God. Rome has been the living heart of Christianity for 1900 years. Here came the fisherman Peter, whom Christ called the Rock, and from whose cincture he hung the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whom he made the shepherd of his sheep and lambs. Here he and the Christian martyrs by the thousands planted the seed of faith in their blood. Here the hunted Christians carved the name of Peter on the walls of the catacombs. Here a Pope St. Leo, in the year 451, went out unarmed to meet Attila, the scourge of Rome, and turn him away from his mission of destruction. Here contained within the ancient capital of Rome is a little island of peace, the tiny self-governing state of the Vatican City, the capital of another and greater empire, the vast spiritual realm of the Catholic Church. Sentenced to death, but fated not to die. Survivor of 1,000 crucifixions by 1,000 resurrections. The Church of Rome is the beacon of 330 million communicants who are looking to its head as their supreme and infallible ruler in faith and morals, His Holiness Pius XII, Bishop of Rome, Vicar of Christ on earth. For upon that churchman, who as Eugenio Cardinal Pacelli ascended the throne of St. Peter at one of the darkest periods in the world's history, is thrust the burden of rendering to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. The Venerable Pius XI was the first pontiff since 1870 to put his foot outside the Church of St. Peter's. When he did it for the first time on February the 6th, 1922, he did something more than step into a balcony. He literally stepped into the world, not to present a sword, but to give the blessings of peace to Rome and to the world. Ablest servant of the pontiff in this struggle was the brilliant and saintly Prince of the Church, Eugenio Cardinal Pacelli, Papal Secretary of State. In his career as diplomat and goodwill ambassador of the Vatican, Cardinal Pacelli saw more of the world than any man who ever succeeded to the throne of Peter. Perfect master of more than half a dozen modern languages, cognizant of the history and traditions of every land he visited, he knew the soul of a nation as well as the souls of its citizens. Earning the respect of Europe's shrewdest statesmen for his diplomatic insight, he brought the Vatican's political prestige to new heights through troubled years, which saw the rise of governments in Europe that were to challenge every principle and practice of Christianity. New York's skyline, the American business way of getting its head into the heavens, greeted him as the people paid the greatest tribute given to any churchman since the visit of Cardinal Mercier. An enthusiastic lover of flying, Cardinal Pacelli took to wings of steel, visited America from coast to coast and from Gulf to Great Lakes. In that visit, he honored America's national heroes, pleaded with university groups to educate the whole man, body and soul, and recalled that had not Providence decreed otherwise, he would have accepted years before an invitation to become professor of canon law in the Catholic University of America.
Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sanctus.
But less than 3 years after Cardinal Pacelli's American tour, Pius XI lay dead. His soul returned to God to render an account of the most responsible stewardship ever laid on mortal man. And the Church, facing the most critical years of its history, standing in need as never before of a wise and fearless leader, turned to Eugenio Cardinal Pacelli. Benedict XV, the pontiff of the First World War, was crowned at the altar of the Blessed Virgin in the rear of the Basilica. Pius XI at the main altar of St. Peter. But Pius XII moved still forward and was crowned outside the church itself on the balcony, a man of peace facing a world war, and wearing a crown that to outward eyes is regal, but to him a crown of thorns through consciousness of his fellowship with the woes of the wounded world. Radio is light, and light must pay its tribute of thanks to the giver of light by the dissemination of truth. Accordingly, a powerful Vatican City shortwave radio station was donated and personally installed by the inventor of radio, the late Guglielmo Marconi, to transmit sermons and services for the sick, to carry a message of hope to lands where churchmen were forbidden to have tongues, and to summon all men to a peace born not of power and expediency, but of the righteousness and justice of God. At the Vatican's polyglot press, printers who are also expert linguists are constantly at work, translating the words and teachings of the Pope of Peace into countless tongues, so that in the remotest regions of the world, men may read the gospel of international goodwill and forbearance in the printed word of every known language. The Holy Father has been militant against all those systems which make the state an absolute despotic master. As he wrote in his first encyclical, goods, blood, the state can demand, but the soul redeemed by God, never. But it is upon diplomacy that the Vatican must rely chiefly in its hope of ultimately restoring peace to the world. 38 nations, including Great Britain, which has its own established church, maintain representatives at the Holy See. To Rome, since the outbreak of the war, have come state missions and personal visitors from all over the world. In such contacts with world powers, the attitude of the Church has well been summarized by the Holy Father. We solemnly declare that usurpation of government authority is entirely alien to the Church. She does not claim to take the place of legitimate authorities in their proper spheres, but offers them help after the example and in the spirit of her divine founder, who went about doing good. The Vatican State is the smallest sovereign state in the world. Upon a pasture of about 1/6 of a mile from end to end, the spiritual father of Catholicity shepherds his flock of 330 million Catholics. With Within its walls, built in the 9th century for protection against Saracen invaders, is a territory which has been a completely independent nation since 1929. Its 1,000 citizens subject, not to the laws and government of fascist Italy, but to those of the Papal State. Entirely enclosed within Italy, the Papal State functions as independently of the Italian government as any nation 1,000 miles away. It has its own customs regulation and system of passports, and all visitors wishing to enter the state, including citizens of Rome, must first obtain a card of entry. Highest lay authority of the Vatican is its governor, Marquis Camillo Serafini, who is responsible to the pontiff for the administration of all civil affairs of the state. A miniature nation which has its own problems of public welfare and protection, of economics and industry, of communication and transportation, of domestic commerce and foreign trade. Shortest railroad system in the world is the Vatican Railroad. In its station, elaborately decorated to receive royal visitors, no royal visitor has ever set foot. And the last pontiff to make a journey by a railroad was Pius IX in 1859. But the railroad is important to the Vatican as the principal access to the outside world of a tiny nation which produces none of the things it consumes and must depend upon imports from abroad for its very existence. The Vatican stores contain food supplies far cheaper than in Italy, for within the little state there are few import duties and none of the foreign trade restrictions imposed upon Italy by the government. Vatican employees are the envy of Roman working men, for besides their privileges, many of them live rent-free and pay no taxes. At Vatican City's single bar, where vermouth is the strongest liquor sold, the most popular drink next to lemonade is coffee. As an independent nation, Vatican City has its own currency, which is minted chiefly as commemorative pieces. Its post office, opened in 1929, today has 4 offices, employs 15 people, and since its beginning has proved to be one of the busiest ventures of the little state, as stamp collectors all over the world eagerly snap up each new issue as it appears. In Italy, all Vatican mail is considered the inviolate property of a neutral sovereign state and is not subject to wartime censorship or seizure by agents of the fascist government. To protect the city's fabulous wealth of historic buildings and its treasures of art, the Vatican maintains its own fire department. Throughout the tiny state, all industries are Vatican-owned and operated, where only such enterprises are carried on as are necessary to the maintenance and operation of the community. The extensive modernization of the Vatican, which was one of the prime achievements of Pius XI, has been continued by Pius XII to meet the changing needs of the time. Thanks to pontifical assistance, industrial mechanization is today completed. Built in 1923, the power plant of Pius XI today supplies the electrical energy not only for lighting the buildings of the city, but for its numerous workshops as well. Buildings erected centuries ago, when the principles of modern engineering were unknown, are in constant need of repairs and restoration. To keep the Vatican's palaces, churches, gardens, and museums in good order requires the services of an army of laborers, and a large percentage of the Vatican's 1,000 citizens are employed in this work. Nearly 300 employees are required for daily house cleaning alone, a never-ending process in the countless halls and galleries of the Vatican. For every pontiff through 600 years has left his imprint on the city's architectural history. To keep up the 15 acres of Vatican gardens, first laid out by Pope Nicholas III in 1277, requires the full-time services of scores of caretakers. They, as well as all other Vatican employees, must lead lives above moral reproach and in every way conform to the standards of a strictly ecclesiastical community. The public may be admitted to these gardens under certain circumstances. Every afternoon on the stroke of 4, they are empty to visitors, so that the Holy Father may take without interruption the daily walk, which is his only recreation. To act as the police force of a community which has virtually no crime is the responsibility of the pontifical gendarmes, whose specific duty is to maintain order in the Vatican Palace. The papal gendarmes, whose corps musters 62 men, are recruited from among young Italians who have completed with honor a period of service in the Army of Italy and can produce certificates attesting to a blameless character. An experienced body of troops, they are prepared to act not only as police, but as a defensive force should their tiny state be threatened with invasion. Oldest and most famous of the Vatican Armed Corps is the Swiss Guard, to which, since 1505, has been entrusted the responsibility of protecting the Holy Father's person and his dwelling. They are also guards of the Apostolic Palace, but may not penetrate farther than the first antechamber. These guards have behind them a long tradition of heroism, earned during ages in which the Vatican was often under frequent siege. Still recalled in the annals of the Corps is the sack of Rome in 1527, when all but a handful of a guard, then numbering 250 men, died in defense of their pontiff. To the Swiss Guard, only Swiss Catholics are eligible, and They must be at least 5 feet 8 inches tall, under 25, unmarried and physically perfect. In the Constitution of Switzerland, which forbids its citizens to enter the military service of another nation, a specific exemption is made for the Swiss Guard. The Vatican Library is first among the great libraries of the world, not only in the importance of its materials, but in the number of its manuscripts. Here the historian finds the source material recording the history of the Church for 1900 years, and particularly those ages when the Church was the only civilizing influence in a world fallen into barbarism, and learning was forgotten by all but churchmen. Within its walls are 50,000 ancient manuscripts, 350,000 prints and engravings, and a quantity of other books which require 7 miles of shelving 3 stories high. Among the manuscripts are the Republic of Cicero, probably the oldest original Latin manuscript, and the letter of Mary Stuart to the Holy Father reaffirming her Catholic faith. In the library, too, are ancient papal seals or bulls, circular plates of metal, which were attached to important documents. Another type of seal is that which the English barons attached to a petition of Henry VIII to Clement VII for the annulment of the king's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, the refusal of which separated the English Church from Rome. The Vatican Library is catalogued on the model of the Library of Congress, opening the treasures of the ages before printing was invented. Working slowly and painfully by hand on their missals and manuscripts, in monasteries which were the only refuge of thinking men, monks of the Catholic Church in early days spent their entire lives in the pursuit of wisdom and recording it for generations yet to come. Preserved from loss by the early pontiffs, thousands of ancient and irreplaceable volumes are constantly being mended and repaired to save them from the destruction of time. Pierpont Morgan had 56 priceless manuscripts of Coptic times restored here by a technique originated by the experts of the Vatican Library. The museums and art galleries, as well as the library, attest to the humanist and cultural traditions of the Vatican. Contemporary to all Christian civilizations and the link with the pagan world, it was only natural that it should amass such unrivaled collections as to make the Vatican galleries the greatest treasure house of art on earth. Open to all visitors of every race, creed, and nationality, these galleries are maintained by the Church as a solemn trust for all the peoples of the world. The Vatican Palace was not originally built as a residence, and today only a comparatively small part of the palace is residential. Much of it is given over to housing artistic creations, even of those bygone days which the ignorance of intervening centuries had neglected and buried. The gold in the ceiling of one of the rooms in the art gallery was hammered out from the precious metal which Columbus brought back from his voyage to America. The best-known staircase in the Vatican is the Scala Regia, designed by Bernini, which by skillful arrangement of the columns and by decreasing the diameter as it goes up, gives the impression of an interminable ascent. Notable among the rooms are the Loggia of Raphael, which because of its 52 biblical scenes has been called Raphael's Bible. This most celebrated painter in the world's history whose prodigious output would seem to indicate a long life, actually died at the age of 37 on the anniversary of his birth. Raphael's art speaks and will ever speak to humanity in the eternal language of the beautiful. The Church, as the mother of art, possesses now such an abundance of masterpieces of all ages that were all the other collections of the world destroyed by the same catastrophe, the Vatican collection would suffice for the perpetuation of aesthetic culture, both Christian and pagan. Greatest single treasure of the Vatican is the famed Sistine Chapel, completed by Julius II, who commissioned Michelangelo to paint its ceilings with its towering masterpieces. For 4 continuous years, ending in 1512, Michelangelo worked there on a high scaffolding flat on his back, depicting the history of man, while down below the ceremonies of the church, changing from festivals of joy to periods of mourning, marked the flight of time for common men. Day by day, new visions came to fill his great mind, and cut off as he was from the mass of men, and wrapped in superhuman ecstasy, he passed his time with the mighty children of his fantasy. "30 years later, a worn and tired old man, he returned and painted on the side wall his immortal Last Judgment, reflecting his own contemplation of the dark problem of life and death. Because the Vatican's works of art are inevitably subject to the corrosion of time, a large staff of artisans are maintained to preserve and repair them. The Papal States Mosaic Workshops, maintained to care for the great numbers of priceless mosaics in the city, have revived and kept alive an art that for years had almost been forgotten, and before the war was a flourishing industry, accepting and executing outside commissions. Vatican experts have been pioneers in developing new and scientific methods of restoring paintings. Particularly perishable are mural decorations, for wall surfaces are subject to cracking and crumbling, and the paintings themselves tend to flake or blister. To avert damage by blistering, scientists have devised a new method of injecting under the surface a substance which reduces the swelling and causes the paint to re-adhere to the wall, only one of many valuable inventions by the Vatican staff. The ancient art of tapestry work still survives among the nuns who spend their time repairing old tapestries, which without endless care would slowly disintegrate. Thus rich in treasure and in tradition, forever being modernized and forever unchanged, the splendor of the temporal realm of the pontiffs of Rome has endured for these centuries. The biggest and most overpowering palace of worship ever built by man, St. Peter's, has been revered by the devout through numberless generations as the tangible symbol in stone of Christ's power on earth reposing in his church. Into this great shrine of Christendom, which was started in 1506 and took 125 years to build, has gone the painstaking work of great creators, mighty men of art, master builders like Bramante, who drew the original plans, and Michelangelo, who threw against the vault of heaven's blue the greatest dome ever lifted by the hand of man. Every pontiff in 400 years has left his mark upon St. Peter's, and in his hold upon the imagination of the Roman Catholics of the world, it has no equal among churches today. Built immediately near the spot where St. Peter was crucified in the year 67, and above the main altar where he is buried, the great dome arises 450 feet above the ground, bearing the very words which Christ pronounced to Peter at Caesarea Philippi, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." Against one of the immense pillars is the venerable statue of St. Peter, cast in the 5th century from the bronze of the statue of Jupiter. Seated in his chair, the symbolical keys in his hands, the faithful kiss his feet in testimony of their faith in him who said, "Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life." The altar of the Temple of Solomon is so called because it contains a pillar which once decorated the Temple of Jerusalem. The Pietà of Michelangelo, sculptured in 1499, depicts the mother of Christ holding her crucified son. Michelangelo justified her youthful expression saying, "She was too beautiful to grow old." It is not the lips but the hands of the statue which show the intensity of the grief into which her soul is plunged. Man-made notions can be man unmade. But Catholics have always believed that truth is of God's making, not ours. Families whose life centers in the church believe that what the world needs today is a voice that is right, not when the world is right, but right when the world is wrong. To St. Peter's as the mother church of Christendom, families bring their young, that having received human life through the womb of the flesh, they may now receive divine life through the womb of the Spirit and the waters of baptism. To the tomb of St. Peter's come the faithful to recite the creed and to pledge their loyalty to the 261st successor of the fisherman who made the initial act of faith upon which Christianity reposes. "Thou art Christ, the Son of the living God." Part of St. Peter's are the low vaulted crypts which underlie the church. Crypts that were the foundations of an earlier basilica erected by the Roman Emperor Constantine, later pillaged by the Saracens in 846. These crypts today contain the tombs of many pontiffs where the faithful revere their memory. In an age when the world is sick, not because of a need of new ideas, but because of the abandonment of old truths. It is comforting to find a place where there is reverence for the dead who held fast to a truth that alone has remained unshaken amidst the wars and revolutions of 2,000 years. As the human body is divided into millions of cells and dozens of organs, but governed by one head and vivified by one soul, so the Catholic Church is composed of millions of Catholics functioning through a hierarchy, governed by one visible head, the Vicar of Christ, and vivified by the Holy Spirit, which descended on the Church on Pentecost. It is upon churchmen closest to the throne of St. Peter that the Supreme Pontiff most relies for help in bearing responsibilities too heavy and burdensome for any one man. Always at the Pontiff's side, except in the privacy of his own apartment, is the Noble Guard, which, made up of Italian noblemen of ancient lineage, is the most distinguished of the Vatican's armed corps. New members of the Noble Guard are picked by rigid examination, both written and oral, and the first requirement is a fluent command of several languages. Of the scores of Roman aristocrats who annually apply for admission to this select corps, comparatively few are able to qualify. Both Swiss and Noble Guards are an integral part of the household administered by Monsignor Arborio Mella de Sant'Elia. Upon Monsignor Sant'Elia rests the heavy responsibility of running a court bound at all times by an inflexible and complicated etiquette, first laid down centuries ago and ever since rigidly adhered to. And in addition, he must supervise the administration of a household of more than 500 people, at once an ecclesiastical organization and a dwelling place. More than any temporal ruler, His Holiness is surrounded by ritual and tradition. For as Pius XII, he is in direct succession to Peter the Fisherman, Prince of the Apostles. With the vestments and symbols of his high office, he has assumed the obligation Christ laid on Peter nearly 2,000 years ago to build well and strong the Church of God. Of the 12 congregations presided over by cardinals, few have weightier responsibilities than the Congregation of Rites, which deals not only with the liturgy of the Latin Church, but also with the causes of beatification and canonization. At the opening of the meeting to discuss a canonization, at which to hear the medical testimony a doctor is in attendance, the seals upon the reports of miracles are passed to the members for inspection. A witness reads evidence attesting a miracle wrought on behalf of the candidate for canonization, which later on will be attacked by the devil's advocate appointed by the Church to destroy, if possible, the claim. Owing to the amount of careful work involved, the vast information to be gathered concerning the person, as well as the scientific scrutiny touching on the validity of the alleged miracles, canonization is a slow process. It is difficult enough to live a saintly life. It is more difficult to have that life declared saintly when one is dead. Today, with religious freedom under fire, with the very existence of the church threatened by the conquering might of godless nations, the Roman Catholics of the world are turning with new devotion to a faith that has endured and grown strong through these 2,000 troubled years. To Rome and to the Vatican each year still come countless devout pilgrims to visit the fountainhead of their faith. The goal of every visitor to the Vatican is an audience with the Holy Father. And every day the offices of the master of the household are filled with applications for the eagerly sought cards which admit the holder to a few moments in the presence of the pontiff. Held twice weekly, the papal receptions are among the prime responsibilities of the master of ceremonies, who with his staff supervises every ritual involving the pontiff's presence, down to the smallest and most carefully regulated detail. More than any pontiff of recent years, Pius XII has made himself accessible to the public, descending from his throne to walk among his people and to talk with them. For well he knows that to be received in public audience and to carry away the apostolic blessing represents to many of them the achievement of a lifelong desire. The Academy of Science, to which belong some of the most distinguished scientists of all lands, attest to the Church's belief that since the truths of faith and the truths of science both issue from the God of truth, they cannot possibly be in conflict. A distinguished naturalist and a well-known philosopher is the learned Franciscan Père Gemelli. The Church fosters attendance at the Academy of Science, that the vast army of Christian scholars may bend scientific discoveries to the comforts of men and the cause of truth. One of the outstanding institutions of Catholic Rome is the North American College. For more and more, the United States, with its vast Catholic population of 22 million, is playing a major part in the Church's destiny. At this college, youths brought up in the young traditions of the Western world come for the first time into direct contact with the matured tradition of a church which is older than the contemporary civilization it helped to establish. Each year, many of its priests are prepared to return to America and carry on there the work of the church. Among the elite of the church's army are the members of the Society of Jesus, who conduct the Gregorian University in Rome, where young candidates for the priesthood are schooled in the rigid intellectual and spiritual requirements of the church. In this, as well as in all schools of Rome, all lectures by the professors and all recitations of the students are in Latin. Founded in 1539 by St. Ignatius Loyola, the Society of Jesus is made up of highly trained men, selected for force of character and intellectual ability, and devoted, as their constitution puts it, to the imitation of Christ. In all examinations for degrees in Rome, the student must first present a thesis involving research and making an original contribution to knowledge. The professors then object to the candidate's thesis to test his grasp of the subject. The whole examination is conducted in Latin, for in Rome, Latin is a living tongue. One thing is certain: in the church, everyone who receives his doctorate of divinity believes in divinity. 300 years older than the Society of Jesus is the Order of the Dominicans, founded in 1216 by the Spaniard St. Dominic. They are known in some places as the Black Friars because of the black cloak they wear over their white garb. Officially, they are known as the Order of Friars Preachers. Their motto is to praise, to bless, and to preach the truth. Their ideal combines contemplation and action for the personal sanctification of its members, for the welfare of society, and for the wider recognition of God. The Dominicans, by their fidelity to their primitive ideals and by their 700 years of unbroken unity, have won great distinction because of the giant minds and hearts they have enlisted in their campaign to enroll humble intelligence and zealous piety in the cause of truth. Among their many distinguished members was St. Thomas Aquinas, who has been called the wisest of the saintly and the most saintly of the learned. Today, all the monastic orders of the Church of Rome, all of its 300,000 priests, all of its 2,000 bishops and archbishops, and its 80 princes of the Church, as in the very early days, make intercession for Peter, that the spiritual values he shepherds may be liberated from the chains of oppression. The papal apartments, a light shining in darkness. The world, once said Pius XII, is in darkness because in it Christ has been re-crucified. But whatever be the aftermath of the apocalyptic violence of war, nothing can shake the faith of the millions of the devout in the words of the Master to his church. Behold, I will be with you all days, even to the consummation of the world. Empires may tumble, thrones may shake, but the simple piety of the God-fearing peoples of earth will continue to center about the rock that shall prevail against the gates of hell, and about an altar that shall bring God to man and man to God in the agelessness of eternity.